When going into this season, I planned on doing something with cast on crit, but out of all of my list of skills, Bone Cage would have been near the bottom. Scratch that. It wouldn't have even been on the list. It done fell off, which of course means I was wrong, and it ends up being my favorite mapping build I've ever played. It's fast, it's smooth, it has a large AoE, and it synchronizes with cast on crit perfectly. All these maps you see in the background were Juiced Breach, multi-tower stacked, and of course, +4 difficulty bosses. And Bone Cage pretty much just walked through them. Turns out if you combine the tankiness from Lich and the absurd damage from cast on crit DD, you're really not going to have any problems. Now I did end up making this as a Lich, and overall, I still think Lich is the tankiest option you could go for. She has a good balance of tank and damage, but to be honest, you could easily go Infernalist or Blood Mage, and you could potentially have even more damage than what I'm showing here. I'll save some of the theory crafting for later. For now, let's just get on the same page so you can understand what makes the build tick. First of all, one of the strongest things Bone Cage has going for it is the built-in ability to pin enemies. So right off the bat, we're already talking about one of the best defensive tools in the entire game, just built into our skill. Initially, you can only cast Bone Cage around you, but if you add in the Astral Projection support, this will make it so you can cast it like a normal ability. From this point, if you add in Spell Cascade, this will give you more clear. This also makes it so the cages will overlap, which means you can now multi-hit the same target. And this is where cast on crit comes in. Technically, my Bone Cage already has enough damage to clear maps, but it doesn't always hit every mob I'm aiming at. Now if you throw in cast on crit Detonate Dead, this easily takes care of all the extra mobs I'm missing. And if you played PoE 1, then you already know that Detonate Dead is just as busted in this game as it was in that game. Now because Detonate Dead is technically a physical skill, all the fizz and crit scaling I'm getting on the tree will also work with Detonate Dead. So we're not even like forcing Detonate Dead in, it literally just scales along with Bone Cage. So far so good, everything sounds good. And now we need to talk about the biggest mistake I made while playing this build. This issue caused me a massive headache because I couldn't understand why, when I was fighting bosses, my mana would go to 0. Turns out, if you don't turn off cast on crit when fighting a boss, Detonate Dead will still trigger, even if there's no corpses to detonate. I spent 2 days trying to figure out why my mana was 0 on bosses, and the answer all along was that I just needed to turn it off. The amount of frustration that was removed the second I found that out, honestly, kind of embarrassing. But anyway, for single target, I use Bone Storm alongside with Temporal Chains. Even with over 100% cast speed, Bone Storm still needs time to build up its projectiles. So the idea is that while I'm just standing there charging it up, Temporal Chains will buy me at least a little bit of time so I can get the Bone Storm off. Now, here's a disclaimer, and honestly the only disclaimer I have for this build. +4 map bosses with Bone Storm is great. I had no problems fighting any of the bosses at all. However, when fighting +4 Arbiter or Zesht, Bone Storm, even with over 100% cast speed, still takes too long to cast. Long story short, these bosses just move way too much at +4 difficulty. I can't recommend you use Bone Storm at those difficulties. I do kinda have a backup, but honestly, I'd just recommend not bothering to fight them at +4. But like I said, for everything else in the game, Bone Storm is completely fine. Okay, with all that out of the way, I'll show you all the gems and supports I'm running, but as usual, they'll also be in the build guide below. I did make this as a fresh character. I wanted to see how the build would work through the campaign and, early maps. Honestly, I still recommend just leveling with Essence Drain Contagion. I spent about 2 Divines on Twink Gear and just tried any skill combination I could think of, but nothing felt better than the Essence Drain Contagion. So if you're starting out on a fresh character, just do the old ED Contagion and you'll be completely fine. Once I hit about, I'm gonna say level 70-ish, that's when I made the switch to Bone Cage, and well, at that point, I never looked back. Okay, real quick, I want to explain weapon swapping and blink. My last video, there was a good amount of people that just didn't understand how this was exactly working, so let me just explain this because this is literally something you can use on any build in the entire game. This is my main hand weapon setup. If I press X, which is my weapon swap button, my blink turns on. So here's what's going on. I don't have enough spirit to support blink and cast on crit. So what I have is cast on crits on weapon 1 and not on weapon 2. So when I weapon swap, it automatically turns off. Blink is turned on to my weapon 2 only and not my weapon 1. The idea is that when I'm mapping, I'm casting Bone Cage, we're chilling. I weapon swap with X, whatever your button is, press it. If I space, which is my dodge button, I teleport, and if I cast Bone Cage, I'm back on weapon 1. And make sure all of your skills are all on weapon 1 that you're actually going to be using for, weapon 1. The only thing I have on weapon 2 is just blink. Any other button I press will automatically switch me back to weapon 1. It's pretty seamless once you get used to it. You can run second wind and ingenuity here if you want, but personally I recommend ingenuity, second wind, and clarity on your convalescence. Of course, these are just weapon 1. Alright, that's it. I just wanted to get that out real quick before we go over the gear. Alright, speaking of the gear, there's a lot to go over. Normally when I'm talking about builds, sometimes I'm playing like a minion build, for example, and it's kind of like, come on. Most of those builds are pretty much copy and paste. Maybe the skills are a little different, but 90% of the time if you're playing a minion build, your tree's going to be in the exact same area, right? With a build like this, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of things you can do. There's different ascendancies, there's different gearing options you can do, and I want to go over all of them, but I'm going to try to keep this really clean and really concise. So let's get started. First of all, in order to understand why I'm wearing like mana regen gloves here and I have max life on my amulet, we got to understand Lich real quick. So starting off, let's just break down this node and this node. The rest are pretty self-explanatory. With this node, you regenerate 6% of your maximum life as mana, which means our HP is now our mana regen. This node makes us lose 5% of our max mana per second. So overall, we still net gain mana regen, but it's not enough to sustain a 304 mana cast Detonate Dead. Not happening, right? So we have to work on mana regen. Another way you can scale mana is obviously HP, and technically speaking, if you were to get max mana on your gear, it would actually be to your detriment. Not a lot, but let's say you ended up getting like 300 mana on your gear, you would genuinely lose a good amount of mana regen. So avoid maximum mana where you can. Mana regen is still really good. Starting off with the wand, you want in order plus level to all phys skills, then spell damage or spell physical damage, they're the exact same thing. And then after that, crit chance, cast speed, and then crit damage. You're going to want to work on crit chance until you get to about 70%. I'm pretty sure I'm at 77.5. So pretty much up until 70%, crit chance will be better than crit damage. And then after that, you can start getting as much crit damage as you want. One note you need to know about cast speed, and this is going to go for every piece of gear. I focused on a lot of cast speed. It's only really for Bone Storm. I have like 100 and I don't even know, 30 or 40% cast speed. You don't need that much, especially if you're mostly going to just focus on +4 map bosses. You don't need 140% cast speed. Like 80% would be good enough. I mostly did it because I was aiming for a mix of good bossing and map clear. If you just focus on map clear, you can drop some of this cast speed for more crit damage. I bought this one for about 50 exalts. I know everybody always wants to know how much your gear costs, so my gear cost about 30 divines. This only cost me 50x, but if I was to buy this today, it would definitely be about 5 to 8 divines. After that, we'll talk about the shield. And for the shield, you want +2, then spell/physical damage, and then the same thing as the wand. Crit chance, cast speed, and then crit damage. The shield I wanted didn't exist, so I settled for just cast speed and I dropped some of the crit chance. I ended up making up the crit chance on my skill tree, but that's for later. Overall, if I could make a perfect shield, it would have had 150% total damage, +2, and then cast speed/crit damage. That didn't exist, so this is the next best thing I could get. For the helmet, this is the classic Lich helmet. That the damage taken bypasses energy shield obviously is insane. I opted for perfect rarity and then 2 sockets to make my res capped. My res is perfectly capped, we're completely good there. I didn't feel like I needed more than maybe 30% chaos res, so once I hit about 50, I was good enough. And this shield cost me about 5 divs, I believe, 5 or 6, one of those two. Next up is the amulet, and like I said, life equals mana regen, so I opted for a % life/mana regen amulet, but the biggest reason I bought it obviously is because of the +3. In order of importance, you're going to want +3, and then same thing as the other stuff, it's cast speed and then crit. I'd probably recommend that you just get cast speed on your amulet and your ring though. I wouldn't bother with any crit stuff. Just fill out your stats, and if you can, get rarity. I'm about 90% rarity. It might be a little overkill, but it felt good for me. The anoint you see here is mental toughness, which is literally just reduced mana cost while not on low mana. Mana gets pretty rough when you're running Detonate Dead, so I tried to get as much as I could. Of course, you can opt for damage. You could even downrank your DD to make it more, sustainable. I'm pretty sure I could drop 6 levels on this thing and it would still one-shot most mobs on the entire map. I just leveled everything as high as I could and then try to work around that. After that, we can talk about the chest. On screen, I'm going to put a very cheap, actually, you know what? I think I have one. Hold on. I do. Okay, so I don't even have to put it on screen. I have this chest. This is a wave shaper. You can 100% wear this instead of a good rare chest. Obviously, try to get as much ES as you can. But this chest is Spirit, 2 really good reses. That line right there, the whole mana regen thing, that just means you get an insane amount of recharge rate, and then you get a little bit of mana as armor. In terms of value, this chest is insane. And that recharge node, or that recharge line, is really, really valuable. On my tree, I really couldn't get recharge rate, which means when you press Convalescence, you know, it's okay. It just, you know, it doesn't instantly heal you. But this chest, you press that recharge button, you're full health. There ain't nothing killing you. So this is a really budget option, but there is a conversation to be had that this could be an overall end game chest, especially if you try to get a really good corruption on, you know, maybe the Spirit or the ES or, you know, whatever. So keep this in mind. This is a really solid chest. But my chest is actually left over from my last build. I spent like 5 div on it back then. I just kept reusing it. You want just enough Spirit so you can run, you know, cast on crit, blasphemy, swapping, and then convalescence. For me, with 20 quality on everything, I need 130. So just keep that number in mind that you'll need around 130. You can get Spirit on the amulet, but I opted for the chest. After that, we have another ring here. I don't have 6 mods on this because if I slam it, it might hit mana. And like I said, mana is kind of bad. So just life, rarity, ton of cast speed, solid ring, nothing special. A breach ring is your best in slot here, technically. And this cost me 2 divs. Oh yeah, the amulet cost me 5, by the way. I forgot to mention that. 5 div for the amulet, 2 div for the ring. And then this cost me, I think, 1 div, actually. This is just crit damage, crit chance, and increased mana cost. You don't have to run this, actually. Like I said, a breach ring with just cast speed, especially if you dropped cast speed here. And you kind of see where this kind of, you can move stuff around and it gets a little, I wouldn't say complicated, but you can just move things around. You can get a breach ring with cast speed and life and rarity and ton of res and make up for that damage loss on other pieces of gear, for example. But this is a very, very solid option. It does have a detriment, increased mana cost of skills. So that's not really great. That's why I have as much mana stuff as I do. But overall, insane ring. And yes, the crit damage, crit chance are caster modifiers. You can get a really, really good one for really cheap because I don't think people know that this caster thing affects this. Yeah, you can get a pretty good one for pretty cheap. These gloves. These gloves are honestly what makes this build even tick. Without these gloves, I would not be able to sustain the cast on crit literally at all. Just wouldn't happen. These gloves are actually really, really simple. First of all, I have a corrupted version. Normally it says 150, mine are 182. I would recommend that you get a pair that is, you know, 180 plus, because mana regen is definitely an issue with this build. These make it so my mana just degens, and when I crit, I gain 180% mana regen. That's it. Obviously they have built-in crit as well, so they have good value, but that's all they do. They're just insane mana regen, and they give a little bit of crit. Solid gloves, very cheap. I'm really not sure what I would do besides having these gloves, so these are new, they're insane. For the belt, really simple, right? Res, max life, we've already talked about that. And the boots, just filling out reses, energy shield, nothing special. The gloves were, you know, 30 exalts. The belt was, I think, 2 or 3 div. And then the boots, I think, were 3 to 5, somewhere around there. Sorry, I can't remember these numbers off the top of my head. I think these were like 5. The last thing I want to mention before we start going over skill trees and stuff is that, like I said, if you're not interested in doing like +3 Arbiter or, you know, +3 Zesht, you could drop cast speed on probably the weapon and the shield and you'd be fine. You could get crit damage instead. You could, you know, get more crit chance, whatever. I only opted for the cast speed to make the Arbiter and Zesht doable. I can easily do +3 Zesht for the record. I have done it, but it's not, it just doesn't feel good. If I was to remake this character, I would just focus just on mapping, and I'd probably drop some of this cast speed. But at the end of the day, cast speed does make Bone Cage feel insanely more, you know, comfortable. It's up to you. You can kind of build it how you want. There's really no right or wrong answer here. All right, so for the skill tree, I'm going to show you 2 trees, and each one kind of does something different. This tree is the biggest AoE and the most damage, straight up. Like, this is just going to be the most damage, most AoE. However, for just mapping, I don't know if I would recommend this tree. The biggest problem with this is that you don't have any recharge rate. You do an absurd amount of damage, and you have a good amount of ES. You know, once I get this node, I'd get closer to about 7,000 ES. You know, we're plenty tanky, that's not the problem. It's just more about when you're doing a breach and you're getting hit, your energy shield recharge is just not that great. It's 2.2 seconds. So once convalescence is on cooldown, you're really not, you know, you're really not going to recharge anymore, right? So it's a little annoying, but overall it's more damage and bigger AoE. Now here's the other tree. Now in total, this is less AoE, and I would probably say about 8 to 10% less damage, something like that. But overall, we drop this entire area here, we drop the AoE, and we go over here to this side. The idea is that you can get your stun, you know, stuff over here. You can still get more ES, you can get a little bit of mana regen, you can still get the crit that you lost. The biggest reason I'd recommend this version is because of the recharge wheel here. There's really not a good way to go here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points to get recharge, when you could just redo the tree, take a little bit less damage, a little bit less AoE, and just solve it in a more comfortable manner. Unfortunately, I would recommend do not drop this over here. It's just not worth it. And if you want to, you can, you know, make up some of the AoE here, maybe drop some of the ES nodes. Overall, I think this is the better version for just pure mapping. But if we're talking about doing a little bit of bossing, a little bit of mapping, and having a lot of damage, the other version is better. Outside of that, my jewels were like 2 divines each. Recharge, extra damage with corpse explode, crit damage, spell damage. In terms of most DPS, you're going to want a jewel like this. This is like a 3 or 4 divine jewel. Spell damage is the most important. And then after that, crit chance, crit damage, and then get what you want, right? I opted for energy shield. I think this jewel by itself is about like 25% damage or something like that. It's pretty insane. And obviously 34% ES. I mean, taking this off, I go from below 6k. Pretty insane. Yeah, didn't think this node would be that crazy. Turns out it's pretty crazy. Each of my jewels look very similar, and each of them were around 1 or 2 divs each. And then eventually we get to this. I paid 2 div for +2. This is ridiculous. Obviously this is 23 or 24% more damage, something like that. You can get +3. I tried to buy one. The guy just didn't respond, so it is what it is. But obviously I would have got +3 here and then +1 here. And then at that point, my Bone Storm would have actually started really melting damage. It would have been like 35% more damage if I could have got both of these. But it is what it is. I'm completely happy with the build as it is right now. All right, and in terms of this version of the build, we're done. Like I said, the only option you can really make is cast speed for crit damage / crit chance. Make sure your crit is above 70% and then start really heavily investing into crit damage. Pick whichever tree you feel is more in line with what you want to do. And that's basically the entire build. Now I want to talk about some alternatives, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I did have some ideas when putting this character together. All right, so starting off, I want to talk about Lich. Lich is really tanky, right? Like this is just 25% of all the damage you take is just gone. Yeah, essentially, right? When you combine it with the helmet and this node down here. But the reality is, in terms of damage, it's this thing and then Unholy Might. Is Unholy Might really worth it? Well, there's really no other choice. So you kind of have to either take, you know, what, energy shield or this node, I guess. Like there's really not an option. So I went ahead and just took it anyway. For general clear, Unholy Might is great. Most mobs, you know, don't have chaos res. However, for bosses or, you know, anything tanky, rare monsters, Unholy Might is going to downscale a ton. And I'm not planning on going down here and getting Blackened Heart to scale Unholy Might. This is only like 10% more damage on average, something like that. It's really not that good. So at the end of the day, Lich is just making you really tanky and you get 1 damage node. Sounds pretty familiar to Infernalist. I don't know if these damage numbers are obviously insane, but you can see that this would give me around 40% more damage. Just this node right here, just this crit, that's it. 40% more damage. That is the entire jewel here and Unholy Might combined just for 1 node. Obviously with Infernalist, you would get Altered Flesh. And then from here, you know, you can make some choices. You can get spell damage. Maybe you would go Pyromantic Pact to solve your mana. But then obviously that means you have to get like max fire res to protect yourself. So I don't know if this is going to overall be better. I didn't really do the math. But at the end of the day, this node is insane. This is just so much damage. I mean, it's just so much damage. So keep in mind, Infernalist is extremely good. And then we have Blood Mage. Obviously, she's like the crit ascendancy. You would definitely go scale life. You could still wear the disdain helmet. You could still solve your mana with night scale if you want. There's no reason that you wouldn't want to solve your mana on this build. Cast on crit is still insane. You could even take some spell damage leech. That could obviously be very useful. If you took, you know, between the cracks, critical hits ignore monster armor. you would be able to drop like this will, for example. I don't know if that's really worth it, but I'm just spitballing some ideas I had. Crimson Power and then Grasping Wounds are, you know, insane for tanking. So just keep in mind, Blood Mage is obviously the crit ascendancy, but I don't think you have enough points to get everything you would actually want. Outside of that, if you wanted to just like completely solve your mana, you could do things like Constant Gale, stack Arcane Surge. This would obviously give you an absurd amount of mana. And then for just like general damage, you could either go for Chill or Shock. I'm not totally sold on this, but it's an idea. And then, yeah, I don't know what to do with Chronomancer. I haven't thought about any other ascendancies. That's essentially where I left off. So long story short, build's really good. Get crit chance, get crit damage, blow up the entire map. You're extremely tanky. Have fun. Good luck. This is my favorite build overall that I've ever played, but there's a small chance that the next build I'm working on might be my favorite. Probably stream that when I put it together, so if you want to see that, check that out. Otherwise, that's it for me. Have a good one. I'll catch you later.